1993 KDX 200 about to get woken up with a brand new piston right now. We just got this bike, we don't know the history. We're gonna assume it's the stock piston. The bike's not pretty beat. We'll be able to tell when we start taking it apart, but many of the tips we do in changing this piston should help you out when you're doing yours. All right, so right now we're gonna tear this thing down. We're gonna drain the coolant. We're gonna pull the tank and seat off, pull the exhaust off, and the head stays. All that you should be able to do. If you can't do that stuff, you probably shouldn't be doing the top end. So let's get it to that point and report back. Okay, so first of all, we have all the parts we think to hopefully do the job correctly the first time and do it today. So we have the complete top end kit from Wiseco. It comes with the gaskets, the wrist pin bearing, the rings for the piston, and the circlips. And we should have in here a wrist pin. I forgot to pull it out, so we weren't shortchanged right there. So I didn't forget. So we have a wrist pin to go in there as well. We have a brand new one of those. Okay, so we have our wrist pin that I just found in our box there. Now, since we're going to be working on this and right close to all these other key components, and we have to take the cylinder off anyway, we're going to change out the reed cage. And we have a V-Force reed cage. They have their newest 4X. So this should be 4 times faster, is what we're hoping. Anyway, we know the V-Forces work really good. Going to give it some good snap. So we're going to get this on. And then at the same time, the stock boot is kind of corroded and all weather worn right here. You can't buy a stock one anymore. This company still had some available, Hot Foot Moto. They remade this piece. This is not a stock piece. And it's pretty well done. I'm pretty pleased with how it looks. It's pretty nice, so we'll get that all fitted up at the same time when we have the cylinder off. We already jetted this thing with the PC jetting just to get an initial run, and the thing was really good. So we're pretty happy the way it runs, but since we don't know the history of it, it's a good idea to get a fresh piston and rings in there. And I'm cautious of an air leak happening on that stock boot. So it's a great time to change it all out at the same time. Okay, so we've gotten everything off. Removed the hose, this hose right here. So we got that out of the way. And then this last hose I got right here, I got this one out of the way now. So now I got no hoses in the way. The carburetor, since this is the intake is at the cylinder, it's not a case reed. So the carburetor, you could pull it back and hold it out of the way, but I think in this case, we're just gonna pull the carburetor completely off. The first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set the carburetor back in there just a little bit, and I'm gonna blow all this off. I'm gonna spray it with a little bit of cleaner and blow it all off really good so I don't have anything falling into the engine when I have the cylinder off. So spark plug we're just going to remove so it's out of our way. This would be a good time to change it out if you haven't done. We just did it on this bike. Lots of nuts on this head. Most of them only have, I think because it's such a big head. So we're going to remove all these off and get the head off. Put all these together, but hopefully go right back on. Pull the head off. Everything looks pretty good there. I like this to keep the piston at the top just in case you drop anything. There's probably no real reason, but that is the way I do it. When we get the cylinder on the bench, we're gonna fix, this stud came loose. It came out, so we're gonna take it out and we'll show putting it back in on the bench. We'll clean it up and put it in there good. So now we're gonna loosen the base nuts. And I like to use a 6-point wrench if you can. You wanna just get in here and knock those loose just like that. And these are really hard to get to. And so if you were to round one off with a 12-point wrench like this, that's why we use a 6-point, so it'd be less likely to round off. If it did get rounded off, it's very difficult to get in there and try to get it out. And you can use a dead blow hammer instead of your wrist if you want to save your wrist. Spencer's pretty excited to ride this bike versus the RMX in a real taste test comparison with fresh parts in each. I need to get a clutch for this bike before a real test. Little tap with the dead blow. And I'm lifting with my hand as I lift up. And it's just got to get off the dowel pins. Now I'm at the point I can probably put 2 hands on here and rock it up. I'm going to use the Kickstarter to go down to bottom. It wants to follow me up, so I'll pull it out a little bit. And I can pull the cylinder right up to the bench. Just put my little pliers in here. I'm able to grab that circlip out of there. Get that out of the way. This thing's going to push out. Usually you have to use like an 8T handle to push it out, but this one it just pushed right out with my fingers. I'll take the bearing out at the same time. At this point right here, I can kind of feel on the rod. It's very difficult to tell for sure. Only you could tell if it's really bad. You'd feel some play up and down. Don't worry about side to side. That's normal. But up and down, I don't feel anything. This thing feels great. So now at this point, the gasket stayed with the cylinder. So I'm going to clean it off of there. I'm going to clean this surface off, and I'm going to put my new gasket on. We have our base gasket. You're just going to walk that on. You want to keep it even, or you could tear this thing. You don't want to tear that, of course. So walk it on evenly. Just like that. Make sure everything lines up. Okay, so I got my base gasket on. So now I'm going to put my rag that I cut a little hole in. I'm going to put that on here like this and bring it up kind of to the top of the rod, so when I put my piston on, I'm ready to go. I'm going to clean all that off. A little Scotch-Brite. Now you can take it to the surface plate if you want, but it looks really nice. I don't think we've got anything to worry about here. We'll get our new gasket and we'll be good to go. Because we want to get this stock base gasket off of here. And it does appear that this piston has never been changed in 32 years or so. That it's never been off. Which is pretty cool, right? So Motion Pro actually has a scraper that I forget sometimes that I have. So it works really well also to get in there and scrape those gaskets out of there. You're going to be careful not to put any gouges in. You see these little scratches. Those are just surface scratches. No big deal. Don't worry about that. But you don't want gouges in there. Now, you could break some of this down with just a little bit of lube on there. So a little bit of lube like that will break it down, and you can even use a stone or go back to your scraper. It'll make it a lot easier to come off. Okay, got it all off. I have a little stone to clean up. You can see it's all perfectly clean right there. Not so much there. Okay, so at this time right here, I'm going to change out this reed cage and boot. You can see how nasty that boot looks. I don't think it was leaking right at this moment. It hasn't gone all the way through. When I cleaned the carburetor, I put my finger in there to see if it had gone through, and it doesn't look like it. But it's going to at any time crack, and then you would have an air leak, and the bike would run really lean and then blow up. So we're just going to pull these up. We might need some longer bolts. We kind of determined based on how much thicker the other setup is. Tappy, tappy. None of them are broken. There's a chipped on there. Chipped one. But that's it. Not bad for that old. Okay. So we'll toss that one. And as you can see in here, it hadn't eaten through yet. So even though it looked terrible right here, it still wasn't all the way through. But I think it's kind of a matter of time. And it looks terrible. All right, we're gonna get this stock gasket off here. It's crusted on there. It's been on so long. The cylinder walls look really good. We don't need to hone them or anything. So here, this piece is a little bit thicker and the V-force is way thicker. With our two gaskets, you can see how few threads we have sticking out. So I'm going to get some longer bolts from my bolt drawer. Okay, so that looks way better. So we'll make sure that they don't bottom out. But that's the next size, longer, kind of standard bolt that we could find. So I'm going to get those started, and we don't want, if you had too short of bolts, you could strip those threads out. We're back to this stud. I got 2 nuts, just some spare ones I had around, and I jammed them together like this. And I'm going to put some thread locker on here and screw it back in. Okay, we got our high strength thread locker on there. We're just going to dial it down just like that. Now we can get onto this top nut, which is a 13 of all things. So we'll get that, because it was just a nut I had laying around. Okay, so now I'm going to put this wrench in here, hold that one tight with this hand, and then try to break them loose. Okay, so now we got it busted loose. Okay, so we're going to install the circlip on the piston. I would like get one side in on the bench, and little dikes like this work really well to be able to push it in there. And then I have the wrist pin in there. I'm going to push that wrist pin through to where it stops against there, and I could push it, and you kind of heard it click. That's when it got into its home there. And I can go in here and you can actually move the circlip, and you can feel it move in its groove. And see, it's about 40% standing proud. So you want to make sure that it's fully opened up and in the groove. And when you drop this clip, the wrist pin in, you should be able to see that you have plenty of room to get your next one in right here. Make sure that it'll move a little bit in the groove. It's pretty tight. It won't move a whole lot. You just make sure that it's fully seated. Okay, so the rings come basically preset as far as ring gap. Guys get worried about it. But as you can see, that little tiny gap right there, that's the ring in gap. On something like this, you'd want to be 12 to 14 thousandths. And so what you do is you put a feeler gauge in here. And the piston is what pushes it down to make it flat so you can check it with a feeler gauge. If you feel like you're too tight, which the instructions will tell you how much you need, you can use a stone and just file it like this on each side, just like that. And then recheck it. And so the way you check it is in here, push down, and then feeler gauge, anywhere from, depending upon the size of piston, but 8 to 14 thousandths in inches range. And so you'll want to check that. On most all Nicosil bikes with the Wiseco, we don't even bother checking them. They come just fine the way they are. Okay, so we got a little bit of that assembly lube. We use that Klotz assembly lube, and we can drop our ring in, our bottom ring. And if you're curious about up or down, if there's no mark, it doesn't matter. If there's a mark, it usually doesn't matter, but that mark is right there, so that mark will go up. I put a little bit of lube from my fingers onto the wrist pin, and I'm going to move it in just to where it's about there, to where I go to install it on the bike. We have our top end bearing. We're going to put that on the rod. I just pulled this crushed, like brass washer in here, out of here. So we'll put a brand new one in when we put the pipe on. I'll usually put a little bit of silicone on there to hold it in place so it's not falling while we're trying to put our pipe on. A little bit of assembly lube on the cylinder walls. Help you with some ring seal straight away. Here we go. Just like that. Nice shiny new piston. I'm going to hold that clip in there just about like that. These little dull dikes I use are 40 plus years old. I was a teenager and I got them used. So tells you how old they are. Okay, so it's important to use the Wiseco circlips. The circlips are different thicknesses than the stock ones. So if you bend one, you got to have Wiseco ones if you have a Wiseco piston. So our wrist pin now moves just a hair, which is what you want, and your circlips are fully seated now. Like, make sure they're fully seated. That's the only way you can really, I guess it's one of the main ways people have problems when doing a piston. I got a helper holding the cylinder. I'm pinching the rings. You can do it by yourself, but it is easier if you have someone to hold the cylinder while you work it in there. And then I can work it in and slowly bring the cylinder down just like that. Now go ahead and push it through a little bit, just real slow. Make sure everything seems okay. We'll leave it right there at top dead center. So on this bike, it was really simple for the power valve to go right back into its home right here. New head gasket, and we are backwards. How about that way? Kind of can only go on one way since it is so oblong shaped. So we got everything clean. We don't need anything else on that gasket. We can just drop it on. Okay, so I'm gonna rough out getting all the nuts tight on the cylinder head. People are gonna freak out that I'm not going in my crisscross pattern yet, but we're just snugging them. Okay, torque wrench time, and we are set to 20, and we're gonna start going around. And I'm sure there's an exact pattern in your manual, which you could look up. It's not crazy if you, as long as you're going up, you know, in some type of pattern away from each other, so you're crisscrossing. Okay, now I'm gonna creep up to 22. I think what we're gonna do. Let's hit that one lone dude. Okay, we're good. Spark plug going in. We just put a new one in here, so we're okay not to have a new one. It's a little easier just to get the carburetor together outside the bike when I'm gonna put it back in, just like this. I also have a helper, which is really nice. I'm gonna pull the boot back. And I'm gonna push the front of the carburetor in like that, and then I'm gonna get this clamp, and I'm gonna feed it over so it's here like this while we put the rubber back on. And this just takes some coercion. Okay, so we're getting our head stays back on. I'm gonna start putting some coolant hoses back on. The carburetor getting back on was, without a doubt, the hardest part of the whole job. It took two of us about 7 or 8 minutes, but it felt like 30. That one. Next. Okay, so we're looking good. We're gonna get our coolant back in, get our plastic back on, and we'll get this thing started up. Choke on, gas on. We're all buttoned up. Let's start it up, right? Let's see if it starts right up. Smells good. A little cloudy. It's good for the sinuses. When you got a little bit of a congestion, some two-stroke smoke is sure to fix it. Okay, so really fun to do a two-stroke top end. A brand new two-stroke top end can make it feel amazing. A lot of times compression's not down, so a lot of times you're changing the piston because it's just time. You can risk a crack, especially on a stock cast piston. So if it has plenty of time on it, you want to do it. A 32-year-old bike, you for sure want to do it regardless. So that's what we did. At the same time, I repacked the silencer a bit, so that sounds really good. So we're gonna go, Spencer's gonna go break this thing a little bit. He's gonna break it in and just ride it around second, third gear, just little blips, blip, blip, for 5 or 10 minutes, and then he's gonna get on it a little bit and shift through the gears and let it get to wide open a little bit so you can hear what this thing sounds like. Mm-hmm.